You should have this verse memorized by now. I beseech you, therefore, I urge you, therefore, by the mercies of God, not the fear or the anger, but the mercies of God, that you present your bodies, that's your whole being, a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God. Remember the word acceptable? In the Greek, it's well-pleasing, not just okay, acceptable, but holy and well-pleasing to God, which is your reasonable service. The word service there applies only to serving God. It's a special word. And reasonable is logical. Logikos. Logically, what's the only thing you can bring to God that he doesn't already have? Yourself. He's already got everything else. Well, he may not have you. It's the human race that got away. But I can't bring you. I can only bring me, right? So when it comes to me, if I'm going to come to God, the only thing I can bring him is myself. He says, you haven't really worshiped until you're the one on the altar. Isaac, the only sacrifice that got off the mountain alive. But he gave himself to die. And a substitute was in his place. Bring yourself as a living sacrifice. We've likened that to a graft. If you have a plant on lousy roots and you cut it off of those roots, you're killing the plant unless you transplant it, graft it onto living roots. And our nature is rotten, selfish, dying. Those roots will only create a twisted, selfish tree that's going to end up dead, a dead end. And God says, if you let me cut you off, yes, that's death. Let me graft you in. I'll graft you back into life. And your twisted tree will now be grafted onto perfect roots. And if you just hang on to the graft, the juices will flow, and I will transform that ugly, twisted, selfish tree from the inside out, not the outside in. That's why it says don't be conformed. That's outside in. But be transformed inside out. Sometimes God doesn't get the outside fixed as soon as we want him to. That's because he's working on the inside. And he is more interested on the inside than the outside, because he knows a veneer on the outside can still have rot on the inside. But if you get the inside taken care of, the outside will take care of itself. So he says, don't be conformed. The world wants to force you into its mold, which makes you smaller and smaller. God wants to work from the inside out, which is expanding, and we will be becoming more like Jesus every day throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity. He promises to get all the negative out by the time he comes again. But the good, the growth, the expansion, the being more like Jesus is something we're going to experience forever. When we think we become like Jesus, there's an infinity of like Jesus yet ahead. So don't be conformed to this world, but let me get on the inside of you and transform you. Metamorphosis is the word. Starting with the mind. That's where he starts. We tend to start with the behavior. God starts with the mind. He knows if he gets our mind, he gets the rest of us. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and now I'm using the Venden literal translation, that you may prove what the will of God is. What is your life going to look like if God really gets a hold of you? I think we're all scared. He's going to make us look plain and ordinary. You know, you've met holy people, right? Do you really want to be a holy person? If you're going to have a party at your house, do you go down the church list and say, I want to invite all the holy people? Would we have any fun? Satan's given us this idea of holy as some kind of sterile, static. I've said this before, but I'll say it again here. You know, I like to repeat myself. I think we have this idea that if we all become perfect, we'll all be perfect. If we are all absolutely perfect, wouldn't that mean we're all the same? We've reached that perfection? No. The idea of perfect isn't being the same. It's not being homogenized, standardized. God wants to make us into perfectly the unique individual each of us was made to be. Which means the perfecter we become, the more unique and amazing we'll become. Not the less and less. He says, so if you'll get on the altar and let the old die and let we're using mixing of metaphors here, the graft take on the new, let the juices flow and be transformed, your life will come to be a living demonstration and experience of what the will of God is. And what's that going to be like? Is it going to be boring and sterile and anemic? No. 3 things. It will be good. As we've talked about it, good doesn't mean just a good exterior. It doesn't mean good veneer, good behavior. Good is a quality that starts on the inside at the heart. He says, I'll make you good from the inside out. Quality to the core. I like that. He's got a long ways to go with me. How about you? To have that good quality all the way to the core. But he says, if you let me start the work, I guarantee I'll finish it in time. Says, not only if my will is fully realized in your life, will you be good to the core, quality, but you'll be well-pleasing. Your Bible says acceptable, but the word in the Greek is literally well-pleasing. Not just okay, but amazing. I think a couple of weeks ago I used the word fabulous. God wants us to make us fabulous. Well-pleasing to Him, to ourselves. I don't know about you, but I'm not always well-pleased with myself. How about you? In fact, I think especially us men, we save our choicest words for our descriptions of ourselves in the privacy of our own thoughts. Paul says, if you let God get a hold of you, you become the living sacrifice. You let the graft take, you let the juices flow. He's going to make you good to the core, make you well-pleasing, and the best translation is complete. We're all afraid that if people really know us, they'd realize we're incomplete. We're all afraid we're going to show up at the end and be incomplete. And God says, I'll make sure you're complete. The rich young ruler, he comes and says, what can I do? Jesus says, well, behave, keep the commandments, because Jesus knew that's what he'd been trying to do. He said, I've done all that, but what do I lack? He still felt incomplete. And Paul says, if you let God have full control, you die to the old, live to the new. Let his juices flow and transform you from the inside out. You don't have to be afraid that you're going to end up ashamed at his coming because you feel incomplete. Ever since we chose to opt out of God at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we felt incomplete. That's what naked feels like. Immediately they felt naked and they tried to finish it off with fig leaves. Looked pretty stupid. I think that's what we're afraid of. When he shows up, we're going to look kind of stupid because we've kind of tried to fix ourselves up. And he says, no, let me do it. Just go ahead and die to that and let me graft you into me, and I'll make you good to the core, well-pleasing, and complete. You won't have to worry about feeling incomplete. And then where we went a couple weeks ago was to verse 3. For I say, therefore, based on what I've just said, through the grace given to me, that to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly as God has dealt each one the measure of faith. Now, putting this in its context, why does Paul say verse 3 after verse 2 and 1? He says, now be careful that you don't become, and the word is literally in the Greek, hyper-minded or hyper-thinking of yourself. Don't become hyper-minded. Instead, become saved-minded is literally the word there for sober thinking. Paul says, don't get off track by thinking too much of yourself. And I think what he's suggesting is that if God makes you good to the core, if God makes you well-pleasing, and God is making you complete, you know what Satan's next temptation is going to be? When you're incomplete, he tries to get you to complete it with all kinds of stupid stuff. He tempts us to do things that look like they're going to be completing, and they really leave us depleted. And Paul says when God gets a hold of you, he's going to do such amazing things that Satan's temptation then will become for you to start thinking it's really you and not him, and becoming hyper-minded. Thinking too much. Wow, I'm becoming an amazing person. I mean, think about the most glorious being that God ever created. Lucifer, the highest angel. What was his fall? He got hyper-minded. He got proud. I'm amazing. And instead of taking all that amazing, he was amazing, but God made him amazing. He didn't make himself. But instead of using all those amazing skills and abilities and talents and wonder to enhance the lives of others, he decided he should be enhanced. I will be like the Most High. His heart was lifted up because of his beauty. He went from giving to merchandising. Instead of just giving all that glory to others to serve them, he started trading off to get more for himself, and that's sin. So I think Paul is warning us here. God wants to do something so amazing in your life that if once he's been doing that and you get your eyes off of him, you get your eyes back on yourself, and it'll become a self-defeating reality. So don't think more highly of yourself. Don't think this is you that's happening. This is God that's happening in you. So think soberly. The word is literally saved. The word for salvation or saved, sozo, and the word for the mind or the brain. Think saved-mindedly. What would it mean to think saved-mindedly? I'd like to suggest you can't think saved-mindedly unless you've been saved. Right? So get on the altar, become the living sacrifice, let God save you. Because the moment he grafts you into himself, you are grafted into eternal life. Because that's what God is, right? So when he grafts you in, even though you're still a twisted tree from the old root system, you are grafted into eternal life. That means you're saved. You know, the Bible talks about you have been saved. Do you believe that? Have you been saved? Turn your life over to Jesus, you have been saved. The Bible talks about you being saved. Does that mean you haven't been saved? No. Once you have been saved, then you start being saved. He saves you for eternity and plugs you into life. Now he starts transforming the old twisted selfish you into what Jesus is like, which is glorious. So you're being saved because you have been saved, not in order to be saved. And yet someday it says you're going to be saved. You will be saved. Now that means the fact that you will be saved, does that mean you haven't been saved yet? No. You have been saved so that you can be being saved so that you will be saved. You got that all? He saves you from death, gives you life, plugs you into himself. Then he transforms you, that's being saved, from your old twisted selfish self to the new in Jesus self. And that goes at the speed of the farm. The speed of life takes a lifetime. But he says, I'll get it done in time. And then you will be saved from this world of sin and suffering, because I'm going to come and rescue you out of the whole thing. He says, think saved-mindedly. Live in relationship with God. He frees me from fear due to my own deficiencies and problems. He lets me know that I am loved with an everlasting love for who I am, not just for what I perform or produce. He frees me to live authentic relationships with others. No need to hide behind fig leaves and pretensions. No fear of being unmasked, because I've already died and been given new life. Saved-minded is in contrast to being hyper-minded. A mind that's saved from self-inflation, self-promotion, self-centeredness, self-doubt, self-hate, self-absorption. Therefore, a mind that has a true perception of who I really am, and that is who I am in Jesus Christ. Understanding my weaknesses, vulnerability, and dependence. I'm not self-generating. I'm not self-sustaining. I'm not responsible for having to take care of myself. I can depend on God as my life source. Being saved-minded is the exact opposite of what Eve did at the tree. And then Adam followed her. They took their mind off of God and put their mind on somewhere else. And ever since then, we've been self-minded. Being saved-minded means I see life from the perspective of God and salvation. An evolutionist could not be saved-minded because an evolutionist doesn't believe in God or the need to be saved, right? If I don't believe there's anything about being lost, I can't understand about being saved. The problem is everyone who's outside of God, no matter what they believe, is headed for a dead end. Hyper-mindedness will leave you dead. Saved-mindedness will leave you alive. And a saved-mindedness sees the same worth and value in others that I have found in myself in Christ. The world thinks they're going to find equality and equity and whatever other terms they use for it by various laws and sensitivity training and who knows what else. The problem is we'll never see each other with equal value until we're saved-minded. The problem is we're all hyper-minded. We think way too much of ourselves and about ourselves. In Christ we can be saved-minded. And I want you to notice, saved-mindedness is available to all. Let's go to the last phrase. I'm going to put just verse 3 on the screen and put a literal translation. Think soberly, think saved-minded, or be saved-minded, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. Literally, as to each, God has divided measure of faith. Now that tells me a whole bunch of things. Number one, it tells me whatever it is, it comes from God, not me, right? I don't have to source this thing. I just need to receive it. God has to each. Who does that include? Each. All, every. So God has done something to everyone. Now that would be the lost or the saved. That would be however we're born, whatever our situation is, God has done something to everyone. And what that is he has given us, I'm going to jump right to the last word, faith. Did you know that faith is a gift? Faith isn't something you have to come up with. Faith is a gift. Just one verse on that. By grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it's a gift of God. Now, The word that and that, not of yourself, in the Greek is a demonstrative pronoun. In the Greek, every word has a gender. Words can be masculine, words can be feminine, words can be neuter. All right? If you have a pronoun, the pronoun has to match the noun that it refers back to in gender. Which is kind of interesting, because sometimes you can be reading along and you wonder just, what does that refer back to? Well, look at the gender. Find the appropriate noun that it fits with. Here's the problem. That is in the neuter. So does that refer back to grace? Does that refer back to saved? By grace you've been saved through faith. Does that refer back to faith? Which is the gift of God? The grace, the faith, the saved. Well, guess what? Grace and faith are both feminine. Saved is masculine. So that doesn't refer back to any of them. Well, what does it refer to? Here's what's happened. You've got a mixed gender in grace, faith, and saved. So Paul goes to a neuter, which means he's talking about the whole thing. The grace is a gift. The faith is a gift. The being saved is a gift. We don't work any of that up. Now, I know that if by faith I grasp grace, I am saved, right? So where am I going to get the faith to grasp the grace? Oh, he gives it to me. Where am I going to get the grace that I'm going to grasp? He gives it to me. Put those two together, you're saved. He gives it to you. So faith is a gift. So it says to each God has divided. Now the little word there for divided, meterizo, is used over where he took the 2 fish and divided them among them all. Jesus managed to make 2 fish feed 5,000 plus their families. That's dividing. Have you ever taken something and you divide it in half, and then you divide it in half, and you divide it in half like a sheet of paper, and pretty soon it's awfully tiny? Well, I know he multiplied it, but just think about it. When Jesus grabbed 2 fish and he divided them, he kept breaking off pieces until he not only had given a piece to everyone, 5,000 men plus their families, but they had been filled and satisfied. So when he breaks off a piece, it's a piece. You know, when we do communion here at early service, we usually put the communion emblems up front. We have decent-sized pieces of communion bread, and we have little 5-ounce cups with about 3 ounces of grape juice. You come to second service, you get something about that big, and you get this little thimble with about 1/4 ounce of juice, just enough to choke on. When Jesus gives you, he gives you what you need. And you have enough to be filled and to be satisfied. So don't miss this. To each, that's everyone. Nobody's left out. To each, God, the infinite source. You know, some of the deaconess ladies have said, have been bothered over the years by the amount of grape juice that it takes for first service. There's only 50 or 60, now we're up to 100 plus, but you know, we several bottles of grape juice were needed for the smaller service, but the bigger service with 250, 300, the little thimbles, wow, you could get the whole bunch for $1. We have an infinite source in God. That's why heaven's economy is all about giving. Whatever you get, just pass it on. Give, give, give. Why? Because there's an infinite amount coming in, so you can just keep pouring it out. Here on earth, boy, if I give too much, I won't have any left for me. I won't have anything to retire on. I won't have anything to take care of my... Boy, I better not give too much because we're thinking limited source. But we have an unlimited source. So God, the unlimited source, to each, that's everybody, divides out a measure. The word is metron, from which we get meter, a measurement, a certain amount. And by the way, the Greek doesn't have a definite article there, and Greek doesn't have indefinite articles. Like we have, he went to the house, or he went to a house. That's the definite versus the indefinite. Greek doesn't have a indefinite. It either has nothing or definite, but that doesn't mean if it has no article at all, you put the indefinite. Try that, it messes things up. Just literally, God has divided measure of faith. And when he divides something out, he always gives you enough, and he gives you what you need. God has divided measure of faith. I want to dwell on that for a few minutes. If God has divided to each person measure of faith, that means from the standpoint of faith, we all are equal. Right? Nobody's advantaged, nobody's disadvantaged, nobody's privileged, nobody's underprivileged. Nobody's ahead, nobody's behind. And I say, wait a minute, in this world, things aren't that fair. People are born different in this world. Some are born to two loving parents in a family, mom and dad that love each other, and some are born into brokenness, chaos, absent fathers, and broken moms. Some are born into where they're loved, some are born into where they're unloved. Some are born into wealth and the opportunity that brings. Some are born into poverty, resulting in limited opportunities. Some have more natural talents and the opportunity to develop them. Some have less talents and less opportunity to develop. Some live long, healthy lives. Others fight illness and die young. Some are born fully functioning. Some are born just plain handicapped, disabled mentally, physically. In this world, life is absolutely not fair. So if you want to get depressed, just think about life in this world. It's not fair. But from a spiritual perspective, with an all-loving, all-powerful God, we all have equal opportunity to get out of this world alive. And let me tell you something, 10 seconds into eternity, that's all that will matter, is that I got out alive. I don't know if you've been watching the news on this, but I've been intrigued and saddened by that sudden sinking of that super yacht over in Italy. Have you seen that? This 150-foot, $40 million yacht with 22 people on it having a holiday. People who were celebrating a victory after several years of litigation, and they came out on top. I don't know whether fairly or not. And some storm half mile off the beach. I think it was Sicily or Italy. Somehow a supercell took that 150-foot boat and put it to the bottom in 16 minutes. The husband of the owner, the daughter of the owner, an international CEO of one of these major brokerage houses who had helped in the court case witnessing for the man who'd come out on top, whose wife owned the boat. And his wife went down, or were in the boat. And the chief defense attorney that had helped the guy win the case and his wife were in the boat. This was a celebration. Out of 22 people, 15 survived. It was a boat with 12 what's the word I'm looking for? 10 guests and 12 crew. That's what I'm looking for. 11 of the 12 crew made it. Only half of the guests made it. Less than half. The only thing that mattered all of a sudden wasn't the fact that one was a billionaire, or whether you were a great lawyer, or a great CEO, or just the cook, or the deckhand. The only thing all of a sudden that matters is that you got out alive. Isn't that right? That's it. And the only thing that's going to matter 10 seconds into eternity is whether we got out of this world alive. Not whether we had a long, healthy life or a short, unhealthy one. Not whether we were privileged or underprivileged. Not whether we were the haves or the have-nots. And that's why I say when it says here that God gives to everyone measure of faith, he divides to everyone measure of faith. From a spiritual perspective, with an all-powerful, all-loving God, we all have an equal opportunity to get out of this world alive, and that's really all that matters in life. All the rest of the unfairness is irrelevant. I mentioned this last week. This is why the secularists who read the New Testament to try to pick at Christians go apoplectic over the fact that Paul didn't seem to condemn slavery. Instead, he tried to lead slaves to Jesus. And then he told them to be good slaves. Honest. Kind. Not even hating their masters, even if their master is cruel. Oh, if you can be free, he says, take it. But in a society where there were, I believe, about 11 slaves to every free man in the Roman world, Paul wasn't in the business of trying to overturn the Roman Empire so that he could free the slaves. He was in the business of trying to get the slaves connected to eternity so that someday they'd be free forever while the empire went down in flames. And it wasn't that Paul was not interested in freeing the slaves. He was interested in freeing people from their true slavery, whether this world treated them fair or not. The number one important thing is that you get out alive and free into the kingdom of God. That's saved-minded thinking. No matter who we are or the circumstances of our birth or life, God gives everyone measure of faith. God sovereignly deals to each person born onto this planet Earth whatever it is that is needed to choose salvation, to choose to reconnect with him in relationship, to choose to reverse the decision made at the tree to break up with God, to choose to move from independence and death to dependence and life. If I make $1 million and rule over millions and live luxury adored by millions, or if I'm poor and I'm ruled over and live in poverty and loved by few or none, the only thing matters is what am I going to do with the measure of faith that God gave me. We can complain that life isn't fair, and we'll be absolutely right. Sin doesn't work. And there's no politician out there that you can vote for right now that's going to make sin work. It'll just be another version of craziness. But God has sovereignly provided every person with the one thing that matters, measure of faith. Faith to choose life, to choose love, to choose dependence, to choose salvation. And it's something Satan is not allowed to take away, not allowed to destroy. God sovereignly protects that, and we can choose what we're going to do with that measure of faith. Jesus says, given it'll be given to you good measure. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, it'll be given into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it'll be measured to you. That's what that word measure is all about. And when Jesus started talking about that kind of faith, the disciple says, Lord, increase our faith. And he said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, here he says you can take a mulberry tree and have it transferred to the ocean. Or elsewhere he says you can take a mountain and have it go into the ocean. He doesn't say faith the size of an acorn. He doesn't say faith the size of a coconut. He says faith the size of a little tiny itty bitty mustard seed. And you look at that and said, what can that do? And we often just throw it in the trash or lose it because it's so small. We don't think it's anything. But if you plant it, it becomes a tree. And Jesus says, I give you the measure of faith. And when you look at it with worldly eyes, it looks like nothing. But if you'll plant it, now planting something involves dying, right? The seed goes into the ground and dies. Living sacrifice. Plant it. It'll grow into everything that's needed. He says, I give you the measure of faith. It looks insignificant from a human perspective, but it's everything you need to get out of this world alive. Whether you're born in the ghetto or the palace, plant the seed. Whether you're born in a loving home, a broken home, an orphan home, or no home at all, plant the seed. Whether life presents you with great opportunities or hard difficulties, plant the seed. Whether you have perfect health or a terminal disease, plant the seed. Whether you have a great marriage, a bad marriage, or no marriage at all, plant the seed. Whether you've achieved your dreams or they've all been dashed to the ground, plant your seed. There's nothing in heaven or earth or hell itself that can prevent you from planting the seed, that can prevent God from germinating the seed, and that can prevent that seed from going into a great plant. Plant it. It's the only thing in life that matters. I mean it. In the long run, when you're breathing your last breath, the only thing that will matter is if you planted the seed. And he says if you plant that seed, it will spring up into everlasting life. And that was to lead into what I was going to preach on today. So come back next week. Because Paul takes this verse 4, go home and read it. And he does this amazing shift. It puts a whole new dimension on this thing. So today, the sermon title has been rewritten to Plant the Seed. Let's pray. Jesus, I want to thank you that you put us all on absolutely equal footing. And you don't have to redistribute wealth to do it because you have all things. You provide what we need to get out of this world alive. And as we're going to see as we move on, you also provide what we need to experience the maximum of life in this world, in the midst of trouble and heartache and pain and suffering. Lord, I pray that we'll just have one thing ring in our minds every day this next week. When we wake up, when we think about life, when we spend time with you, plant the seed. You've given each one that little tiny measure, that little mustard seed. May we plant it over and over this week and water it by spending time in your presence and watch it grow. And we thank you. You guarantee the outcome, an eternal plant in your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.